Welcome to this introduction to mapping sentences in Greek. In using and enjoying Biblical Greek, I offer detailed guidance for learning this technique, and in this video I'll go over the main features to get you started. I hope this introduction will then help you sort out the further details you'll find in the book. It's best to begin by learning to map text in English, so if you've not read that section of the book or watched the video on mapping sentences in English, please do that before going through this video. The first step is to obtain a copy of your passage in Greek. If you don't have a software program for that, then there are copies on the web. If you want to get a copy of the Greek New Testament to have on your computer, one good option is the Greek New Testament with Accents from Tyndale House, the Biblical Research Library in Cambridge, England. Another option is the SBL Greek New Testament. If you simply want to copy and paste a particular passage, then Bible Hub's a convenient source, and it has the SBL Greek New Testament. In the video on chunking and scanning sentences, I go over using these resources in more detail. So assuming you're able to get a copy of the passage, let's review the main guidelines for mapping and then map a couple of passages in Greek. Here are the first 5 guidelines I went over in the video on mapping sentences in Greek, so pause the video and look these over. And here are the rest of the guidelines. So I'm assuming you're familiar with these guidelines from that video or from the book, and we can now see how they function in Greek. We'll use the same 2 passages as in the other videos so you can compare the 3 techniques of chunking, scanning, and mapping and begin to get an idea of when to use which tool. Here's our first passage. If you're not familiar with it, then you may want to sort out the parsing and grammar a bit so you see what you have to work with. We begin by dividing a passage into sentences, watching for periods and question marks, and then within sentences, watching for raised dots and commas. Here we have one sentence and one raised dot there at the end of verse 3. Commas may signal clause breaks, but not always. Here in verse 2 we see commas setting off a vocative. So we give each clause its own line. Watch for finite verbs, that's a major signal of a clause since they're the core of clauses. Also look for participles, especially adverbial participles, since they'll have their own line. A participle that's serving as a subject, direct object, or indirect object will be put on the main line of the clause. Conjunctions are another important signal. The main coordinating conjunctions are the one you see on the screen there. And here are the major subordinating conjunctions and the type of clause they introduce. Once you have the clauses on separate lines, then I recommend you tab over everything so it'll be flush on the left to begin with. And I recommend you use 1/4-inch tab settings. The next step is to align the coordinate clauses so that they're flush with each other using the tab stops. So here you see verse 4 that begins with de is flush with the first line. And you move subordinate clauses and adverbial participles under the items that they modify. You can move them by tabbing and then fine-tune with the space bar. So here, hatan, hati, and hina all initiate subordinate clauses, and the participles are adverbial, so they go under the verbs they modify. So this then is a level 1 map. Now moving to a level 2 map, we use the level 1 map and then sort out the prepositional phrases, putting them under the words they modify. Here we only have one of those in verse 4, and you see we moved it out of position, so we had to mark its original position with ellipsis points. In this map, the final participle is under eta, signaling it's an adverbial participle, but it could be functioning as a third complement of the verb eta. If that's your analysis, then you'd map it like this. Sometimes you'll come up with alternatives and you want to map both of them, and you can do that on a given map. Here you see I've had to use brackets to repeat the material, but usually that's not necessary. Usually the alternate location will be on the same line, and you can use one of these symbols to mark its spot. Here the map shows 2 possible interpretations of the prepositional phrase in Christo Jesu. So this could mean you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. The or option would be you are all sons of God in Christ Jesus through faith. Or perhaps, depending on your view of tes pistos, it could mean you are all sons of God in Christ through His faithfulness. Maps don't include such interpretive decisions about case usage and such, but you can annotate your map. You can add notes either digitally with footnotes or by hand on a printed copy. If you do it by hand, I recommend using ink since penciled notes will fade and blur with time. I have many annotated maps from years ago that I can't read very well now. Also, personally, I find it helpful to use different colors for different sorts of notes, such as lexical notes, grammatical notes, notes on the flow of thought or general content notes, and notes on thoughts from meditation. Let's move on and try doing a level 2 map of our second text. In this verse we have only one clause. The subject ha hierus is separated from the main verb aethelin by 17 words. There are no conjunctions or punctuations to help us out, so the main clusters to work with are around the participles. I begin by tabbing the lines flush with each other on the left, and then separating out the participles and their word clusters on their own lines. This leaves the main verb separated from the subject, and they belong together on the main line. Remember, the items on the main line will be the subject, verb, direct object, indirect object, and any conjunctions or negative adverbs. So we need to move the verb up to be with the subject. So I've moved the main verb up to the main line with the subject, and the infinitive thuane is complementary to that main verb, so it can stay on the same line with the main verb since together they convey the verbal idea. So now we've established the core of the clause there on that first main line, and the other three lines are modifiers. So I marked the original location of those three items with ellipsis points, and I've numbered them so we can reconstruct the original word order once the map is complete. So now we're ready to position these modifiers in place to represent the flow of the sentence. The first participle is an adjectival participle modifying to dios, so I move that into place under there, using tabs and then fine-tune with a space or two. The second participle is adverbial, or attendant circumstance, and so it will need to be under aethelon, but the modifiers of to dios block aethelon from view, so I can shift the verb to the right but that doesn't really give enough room, obviously, since the participle will go off the side of the page and wrap back around. Sometimes you can adjust items to give more space. In this case, we could put pra underneath ontos, which would give us room to back up aethelon more, but still that adverbial participle line is going to go off the page. Now we're heading for a level 2 map. That means we move the prepositional phrases in place so that epi phrase can be moved into place. So I mark with ellipsis points where it's going to be, use F2 to move it, and then move it into place with tabs. You can go anywhere underneath a word. Usually I put it near the end, but if you need space, then you can move it more to the front of the word. That's still not going to be enough room. We can move that all the way over on the edge, and even move that over a bit more, but still not going to end up under aethelon. So it's time to bring in the line draw symbol. In an earlier video I pointed out how this symbol is composed of 3 characters. So you make room for the symbol, and then copy it in, and then move it into place. And then you can extend the length of it by copying that middle section. So Control C, and then Control V as many times as you need to get it under the word you're heading for. Now what do we do with soon, because that needs to go under aethelon as well. And now the adverbial participle is taking up all the space. In this case, we can move it up underneath aethelon. So highlight it, F2, take it up, put it in place, tab it over. Oops, it's going off the page as well. So we back that up, and we can back aethelon up a little bit and then delete a couple of these sections. That looks like it's almost too far to the front of aethelon, so I'm just going to space it over 1 or 2. And now we have the participle underneath aethelon from that line draw symbol, and soon underneath aethelon, and soon is further to the right than the participle because of the line draw symbol, so that they're all in place. So this then is a level 2 map for our verse, and we can reconstruct the original order through those numbers. So this then shows you some of the main principles of mapping. As I said, using and enjoying Biblical Greek provides more detailed instructions as well as a number of further examples. You might use mapping to sort out difficult passages, though I think probably chunking or scanning would be better for those purposes. But mapping is particularly helpful when doing exegesis or meditating on passages in Greek. If you want some ideas about meditating on passages in Greek, then see Using and Enjoying Biblical Greek Chapter 6. For exegesis, well, there are many good books on exegesis, and most of them include some form of technique similar to sentence mapping. I think this particular form of mapping has several virtues. It works equally well in either Greek or English. It allows you to see the original word order. It doesn't require any special symbols that aren't included in common fonts. It's scalable. In other words, it allows you to choose from several different levels of detail. And it's easily modified and adapted to fit individual preferences. It level of precision in maps means you can annotate them and have a convenient record of your analysis of the passage. In using Enjoying Biblical Greek, I offer quite a few labels you could use to indicate some of your decisions. This way the map will be useful next time you work on this passage and take your analysis further, whether it's through exegesis, meditation, or both. So this is a skill well worth the effort to learn. I hope you'll find that using Enjoying Biblical Greek provides helpful guidance.